Between 1998 and 2004, something unexplainable happened in a quiet corner of northern Vermont. 14 altar boys, all between the ages of 10 and 13, disappeared, not from cities, not from abandoned highways or strange camps, but from a single, isolated church, surrounded by trees. The kind of place you'd passed without a second glance. The kind of church where families were baptized, married, and buried for generations. St. Joseph's. The name still carries weight here, but if you whisper it after dark, people look over their shoulders. It started quietly, a missing child here, a rumor there. The local police called it coincidence. The clergy called it tragic. The town called it cursed. But no one could ignore the pattern for long. 14 boys, all altar servers, all assigned to the same parish, all vanished, one by one, over 6 years. No bodies were found, no signs of struggle, no ransom notes, no witnesses, just empty pews, cold vestments, and grieving families who never got answers. You don't hear about this story on the news. It was buried beneath local reports, smeared across yellowing newspaper columns, hidden behind statements filled with phrases like "no comment" and "ongoing investigation." For many, the story ended the moment the last boy vanished. But for some, especially those who lived closest to the church, it never ended, because the silence that followed was worse than the screams they expected. St. Joseph's Church wasn't grand. It wasn't Gothic or majestic. It was modest, white wooden siding, a single spire, iron gate out front, and a small cemetery in the back, where the stones leaned slightly forward, like they'd grown tired of standing. Families would gather there every Sunday. You could hear the bells ringing from 3 miles away, the sound used to comfort people. Now, it only brings dread. The first disappearance didn't raise any alarms. Jacob L., age 11, June 1998. He had stayed behind to help clean up after Mass. His mother said he always liked wiping down the chalices and blowing out the altar candles. He never came home. At first, it was thought that maybe he ran away. Maybe something at home had pushed him out. But then came October. Another boy, Adam R., vanished under nearly identical circumstances. Both were altar boys. Both disappeared within 10 minutes of Mass ending. Both had been alone with the clergy in the vestry before they vanished. Still, no alerts were sounded. Not really. The town didn't want scandal. The church didn't want suspicion. So things were quieted until it happened again, and again, and again. By 2002, 6 boys were missing, but there were no police bulletins lining store windows. No televised appeals from weeping mothers. Just whispers, private conversations in grocery aisles, nervous glances during sermons. A sense of dread that spread slowly, like mold under paint. Some locals say the church changed after the third boy vanished, that it felt colder inside, like the warmth had been pulled out of the walls. Others remembered the priests acting strange, distracted, jumpy, even fearful. One woman claimed she saw a visiting bishop destroy a stack of letters left by parents in the rectory office. Another man, the groundskeeper, quit in 2003 and moved to towns over. When asked why, he simply said, "I don't cut grass where kids disappear." The most chilling account comes from a boy who survived. His name was Eli. He never gave a last name. In an anonymous forum post from 2011, since deleted, he described how he had served Mass in the summer of 2004. He claimed that one evening, after helping clean up, he was asked by a visiting clergyman to go into the cellar to fetch wine for communion. He refused. The priest insisted. Eli still refused, saying his mother was waiting outside in the car. The priest let him go. That night, the boy scheduled to serve beside Eli, Thomas G., vanished. Eli wrote, "There's something in that cellar. It smells like blood and incense. The walls whisper if you stay quiet long enough." It could be dismissed as urban legend. After all, this is the internet. But the story caught on. And when online communities began digging, they found property. Maps that showed an unused sub-basement beneath St. Joseph's, a part of the church that was sealed off in the 1970s after a fire. But no repairs were ever documented. And the clergy deny the space even exists. What remains is silence. That, and the faces. 14 of them, captured in faded school photos, smiling awkwardly in collared shirts and clip-on ties, all gone. As the years passed, the town of Delbrook changed. The population shrank. Some say the church lost its grip on the people. Others say it still holds power, just not the kind you'd pray to. These days, the doors of St. Joseph's stay locked unless it's Sunday. The cellar, if it exists, is never mentioned, and the bell still rings every week, like clockwork. You can stand outside those gates if you want. Look through the iron bars. You won't see anything strange. Just a small church, an empty parking lot, and woods that stretch endlessly behind, but stay long enough, and you might hear the wind carry something odd, a whisper, a footstep, a boy's voice asking for help. And if you stay after dark, you might not leave at all. St. Joseph's Church didn't begin in darkness. Like most things built by human hands, it started with good intentions. In 1892, a group of French-Canadian immigrants settled in Gothic, Vermont, a remote town nestled between thick pine forests and winding dirt roads. They were simple people, farmers, carpenters, stonemasons, who brought with them a strong Catholic faith. They worked hard, raised families, and believed deeply in the rituals that tied them to something larger than themselves. The church was built slowly, brick by brick, stone by stone. There was no construction company, no blueprints, just faith, hands, and sweat. The land it was built on had once belonged to an abandoned logging camp, a place already rich with stories of missing workers and strange noises in the woods. But the townspeople didn't seem to mind. If anything, they saw the site as a fresh beginning, a holy cleansing of whatever had come before. They named it St. Joseph's, after the patron saint of workers and protectors. Its wooden spire pierced the sky. Inside, simple stained glass filtered pale sunlight through depictions of saints and angels. The pews were hand-carved, the altar imported from Montreal. Behind it, a massive crucifix loomed, casting long shadows every time the bell rang. For decades, it was a symbol of hope and endurance. Weddings, baptisms, funerals, every major moment in life passed through its doors. Children grew up learning Latin prayers, and families gathered for Sunday picnics on the lawn outside. There was a rhythm to the town's life, and the church set the beat. But there were signs, faint, almost forgettable, that something about St. Joseph's wasn't quite right. In 1926, a young priest named Father Duval reportedly suffered a breakdown during Mass. Witnesses said he began shouting in Latin, eyes wide, hands trembling. He claimed to see a child with no face, walking down the central aisle. The church dismissed it as exhaustion, and Duval was quietly transferred to a mental hospital in Maine. His name was never mentioned again in church records. In 1954, the bell tower caught fire under mysterious circumstances. Firefighters contained the blaze before it spread, but when they searched the charred upper chamber, they found something unexpected, not just ash and timber, but a small, hand-carved statue hidden behind the bell. It depicted a wingless figure, blindfolded, holding a bowl of blood. The origins of the carving were never explained. It was quietly removed and, according to some, buried behind the church. There were other incidents. Whispers of children, claiming to hear voices in the confessionals. A diary found in the library, written by a nun who described midnight chants from the basement. But none of these stories made it beyond the town's borders. Delbrook had a way of keeping things contained. In 1971, another major event struck the parish, one that was never fully explained. Father Ignatius, a beloved figure who had served the church for nearly 20 years, vanished. According to records, he was last seen locking the church after a late-night prayer session. The next morning, the doors were found wide open. His car was still parked outside, but inside the church, no trace of him, no note, no struggle, no sign of forced entry, just silence. His disappearance rocked the town, but no official inquiry was launched. The diocese sent a replacement within weeks. Masses resumed, life moved on. But those who had known Father Ignatius said he had changed in the final weeks before he vanished. He stopped making eye contact. He trembled while giving sermons. One parishioner recalled seeing him weeping alone near the altar, whispering a name that no one recognized, Merrill, *, and then there was the basement. Every church has its secrets, rooms meant for storage, forgotten hallways, locked doors no one questions. St. Joseph's was no different. Beneath the main floor, past a narrow stone staircase, sat a small, windowless chamber, originally intended to store wine and supplies. It hadn't been used since the 1970s fire, or so the official story went. But some believed otherwise. *, a few former altar boys now grown, recalled being told never to go near that door. "It's where we keep old things," one priest would say, "things best left alone." One man, who served at the church in the 80s, claimed the door was sealed with iron bars and padlocked, but once, late one night, he heard a faint humming sound from inside, a low chant, male voices, repeating the same word, over and over. No one ever talked about it openly, not the priests, not the parishioners, not even the children who had heard too much. But the basement was there, beneath every sermon, every prayer, every song, and as the years went by, the church changed, that mass attendance dropped, the congregation aged, families moved away, and something about the place felt heavier, like the building itself was straining to hold back whatever lived beneath it. Then the disappearances began, and suddenly, the quiet history of St. Joseph's didn't feel so quiet anymore. Every old rumor, every buried story, every whispered warning, they all came flooding back. Because maybe the past hadn't been forgotten, maybe it had just been waiting, and maybe the church, once a place of safety, had always been something else entirely. It began, like most horrors do, with something small, something almost forgettable. June 14, 1998. A Sunday, Jacob L., 11 years old, went missing after the early evening mass at St. Joseph's. He had been scheduled to assist Father Matthews in cleaning the altar, a task Jacob reportedly loved. It gave him a sense of importance. He never returned home. At first, no one panicked. Jacob came from a quiet, religious family. Maybe he wandered off. Maybe he went home with a friend. But when the sun set and he still hadn't shown up, the concern set in. His mother contacted the church. They said Jacob had helped clean up, was last seen near the sacristy, and had left around 6:30 p.m. Police were notified. A search began. Nothing was found. His disappearance made the local paper a missing child always does. But it faded from public attention quickly. There were no signs of foul play, no strange sightings, no suspects. Just an empty space where a boy used to be. 4 months later, in October, it happened again. Adam R., age 12, disappeared under identical circumstances, after Sunday Mass, after helping in the church, after being seen entering the vestry, and never seen again. His parents were devastated. The town, still reeling from Jacob's vanishing, whispered quietly but didn't act. 2 children missing, from the same church, in 4 months. But no one dared say the word pattern. Not yet. In early 1999, St. Joseph's attendance began to drop. People still showed up, out of routine, or guilt, or fear. But something had changed. A tension in the pews, a nervousness in the air. Parents started pulling their sons from altar duty. Questions were asked behind closed doors. But publicly, everything was fine. The priests smiled. The bishop reassured. The sermons went on. Then, in May 1999, it happened again. This time, it was Michael D., age 13. And this time, there was a witness. His younger sister Emily had been sitting in the back of the church, waiting for him to finish his duties. She later told her parents that she had seen Michael walk into the hallway behind the altar. A tall man in black robes had followed him in, but no one ever came out. When questioned, the clergy denied any unusual activity. They said Michael had helped clean up and was last seen leaving out the side door. Same story as always, but police found no footprints outside. No signs he ever left the building. His sister's testimony was brushed off. Children imagined things, they said. But not all of them. In the next 3 years, from late 1999 to mid-2002, 5 more altar boys vanished. Each one followed the same pattern. Always after Sunday Mass. Always after being alone inside St. Joseph's. Always without a trace. By then, the town could no longer pretend this wasn't real. A group of parents came together in early 2002. They called themselves the Vigil, a quiet, desperate attempt to find answers. They created maps, tracked dates, reviewed who was present at each Mass. They tried to find a connection between the boys, school, family, even blood type. Nothing fit, nothing made sense. They approached the diocese. They were ignored. They went to the police. The investigations were reopened, but quietly, and without urgency. The priest at the time, Father Lowell, insisted the church was cooperating, but those who watched him closely noticed something off. He had stopped giving homilies from the pulpit. He kept his head down during prayer. One woman claimed she saw him burn a stack of handwritten notes behind the rectory late one night. Another said he had confessed, drunk and weeping, that the floor moves when they scream. In September 2002, a local journalist named Paul Trennan published a 3-part series in the Delbrook Gazette titled The Vanishing Saints. He laid out the facts: 8 boys gone, all from the same church, all tied to altar service. He asked pointed questions. He called for a full investigation. Within 2 weeks, the church filed a cease and desist for defamation. Trennan's column was cancelled. He left town a month later. No one knows where he went. Still, the disappearances didn't stop. In July 2003, the 9th and 10th boys vanished together. They were cousins, Peter and Julian M. Their parents had insisted they serve together, never alone. The hope was that safety came in pairs. But that Sunday, both disappeared after Mass. The church claimed they had gone out the back for fresh air. Their bikes were still parked outside. At that point, something broke in Delbrook. Families began fleeing the town. Property values plummeted. Children were pulled from catechism classes. Volunteers stopped showing up to help at the church. But the clergy kept their doors open. 1 year later, in the summer of 2004, it all came to a head. Thomas G., age 12, a quiet, bright boy with a nervous laugh. He had been scheduled to serve Mass with another boy, Eli, the same Eli who would later share his terrifying story online. But that day, Eli's mother came early, honking from the parking lot before he could be sent alone into the basement. Thomas stayed. He was never seen again. His was the 14th case, the final known disappearance. After that, something shifted. The church stopped assigning altar duties to boys under 16. Mass times were shortened. The basement, if it existed, was sealed off completely, and then came the silence. Police reopened all 14 cases in 2005 under a new task force, but by then, most of the evidence was gone. Buildings had been cleaned, records lost, or misfiled. Interviewees refused to speak. Some had moved away. Some were simply afraid. Others had died. No arrests were ever made. No priest was ever charged. The church denied any wrongdoing. The official stance remains the same. We pray for the families, but we have no information. But the locals remember. The names are still spoken in hushed tones. At the edge of the church property stands a small memorial, 14 white crosses arranged in a circle, each with a name, a date, and a candle that is never lit. And behind it all, the bell tower still rises, still chimes every Sunday at 6 p.m., 14 times. Once for every boy who never came home. The public outrage didn't come all at once. It simmered quietly, like smoke leaking from beneath a locked door. By the time the 10th boy had disappeared, people in Delbrook were no longer whispering. They were demanding answers. Town meetings grew tense. Angry parents filled the pews, not for prayer, but to confront priests face to face. Reporters from nearby counties began circling, hungry for a scandal. But the church remained silent. The Diocese of Burlington released a statement in 2003 calling the disappearances a tragedy and offered prayers and support for the families. But they avoided directly addressing the church's role. When asked why all the boys vanished from the same building, during the same rituals, under the supervision of the same few priests, their response was measured. Coincidence? Perhaps. Misfortune? The devil's work. Some even suggested, privately. However, many believed the truth was being hidden, and not just hidden, buried. A retired police detective, whom we'll call Officer H, agreed to speak under anonymity. He had worked 2 of the original missing persons cases, the ones from 1998 and 1999. He said that every time the investigation led back to St. Joseph's, it hit a wall. Warrants were delayed, evidence went missing. He once requested access to the church's lower levels, but was told the blueprints had been lost in the fire decades ago. When he pressed further, the bishop himself called his supervisor. Within a week, he was reassigned. There was a growing suspicion that the church wasn't just a victim of coincidence. It was part of the machinery. That the families didn't wait for answers. Some hired private investigators, others turned to psychics, spiritualists, and even former clergy. One woman, whose son Julian was the 10th to vanish, claimed she had been followed for weeks after speaking to a reporter. Her mail arrived opened. Her phone lines crackled with static. She began keeping a journal, documenting everything. That journal would later be found burned in her attic after she moved away. But it wasn't just the families asking questions. People across the state, especially those familiar with Catholic history, began noticing strange echoes, patterns that felt too familiar. A historian from Boston University, Dr. Emily Carver, published a paper titled The Echoes of Hidden Altars, linking the disappearances to older cases from the 1930s in Quebec, where several altar boys had vanished from a now abandoned monastery. That monastery had also claimed fire damage, lost records, and no suspects. She highlighted the disturbing similarities: rural locations, isolated clergy, secrecy around basements, and sudden silence after a specific number of disappearances. In that case, -13 boys had vanished. Was there a ritual pattern here? A symbolic number? A hidden rite practiced behind closed doors? Some dismissed it as conspiracy, but others weren't so sure. Online forums dedicated to unsolved mysteries began collecting and archiving everything they could find about St. Joseph's. Theories began to take shape, not all rational, but all deeply unsettling. One of the most widely discussed was the Order of the Hollow Flame, an alleged secret society within certain branches of the church, rumored to operate in forgotten corners of old dioceses. According to this theory, the missing boys were selected, not randomly, but intentionally, as offerings or vessels in ancient rites believed to grant vision, prophecy, or spiritual protection to high-ranking members. No hard evidence ever surfaced, but the theory gained traction due to the eerie consistency in disappearances and the age and purity of the victims. Another theory was psychological, more grounded, but no less disturbing. Several former altar boys from other parishes in Vermont began coming forward anonymously. They spoke of manipulation, silence, and a culture of obedience that made them easy prey. Some described being led into small, windowless rooms for special training. Others recalled waking up hours after Mass, confused, with no memory of what happened. Their claims were disturbing but mostly anecdotal. Still, they pointed toward a deeper pattern of abuse and secrecy within the system. One former altar boy said it plainly: "We were trained not to question. That's how they got away with it." And then came the tapes. In 2007, a man cleaning out his deceased uncle's farmhouse outside Delbrook found a box of old VHS tapes. His uncle had once worked maintenance for St. Joseph's. Inside the box were over 30 labeled recordings. Most were routine weddings, christenings, holiday masses, but one tape, labeled only with the Roman numeral 14, was different. It was dark, grainy, and mostly silent. The camera was fixed on a stone chamber, possibly the church's basement. A line of boys, dressed in altar robes, stood in front of a large wooden table. Figures in long robes circled them slowly, chanting in a language not immediately recognizable. The video cut out after 17 minutes. That tape never made it to the public. The man who found it contacted an independent journalist, who attempted to verify it. But before the story could break, the journalist disappeared while hiking in upstate Vermont. His body was found 3 months later, ruled an accident. The tape gone. Still, the story leaked, and it only fueled the mystery. What then do we make of all this? Are these simply disconnected tragedies, the result of a failing system, unchecked power, and poor oversight? Or is there something deeper, older, and more deliberate hiding beneath the robes and rituals? Some believe the church is cursed, not metaphorically, but spiritually. That whatever was buried beneath the land before the church was built was never properly cleansed. That the chanting, the hallucinations, the disappearances there, echoes of something still alive, still hungry. Others turn to psychology, mass trauma, shared delusion, generational silence. But in the end, the only thing everyone agrees on is the silence. That thick, oppressive quiet that followed every disappearance, that clung to the town like fog, that lived inside the walls of the church. It was the silence that let it all happen, that kept people looking the other way, that made it possible for 14 boys to disappear without a single person being held responsible. And now, years later, that silence still lingers. Time moves forward, but in Delbrook, some things stay frozen. The Church of St. Joseph still stands, its brick facade, now chipped and weathered, looms over the quiet town like an old sentinel watching everything and saying nothing. The bells still ring. The candles are still lit. The pews are mostly empty now, save for the elderly and the devout few who refuse to let go of habit. But for many, especially those who lived through those dark years, the church is no longer a house of God. It is a tomb of secrets. The question that echoes louder than any sermon ever preached within those walls is painfully simple. What really happened to the 14 altar boys? Officially, the cases remain open, unresolved. The town police long since passed responsibility to state investigators. The state handed it off to federal authorities, and eventually, the trail just stopped. No arrests, no confessions, no bodies. Just empty chairs at family tables, bedrooms that remain untouched, and birthdays celebrated in silence. What makes the mystery so haunting is not just the absence of answers, it's the patterns that refuse to be coincidence. 14 disappearances, always on Sundays, always altar boys, always after Mass, always from the same building, the same narrow hallways, the same rooms now sealed with padlocks and dust. Every theory brought forward, from satanic rituals to institutional cover-ups, feels both too wild and yet somehow not wild enough. And maybe that's the most terrifying part. That something happened, but no one alive today seems willing or able to say what it was. Some survivors have tried, quietly, carefully. A former janitor, now in his 80s, once claimed there were rooms underneath the crypt that don't appear on any blueprint. When asked why he never reported it, he looked down and whispered, "Because I saw what they did to the ones who asked questions." He refused to elaborate further. He died 2 weeks later of heart failure. Another clue surfaced in 2016, a letter. It arrived anonymously at the doorstep of a now closed Delbrook newspaper, typed unsigned. It read, "They were chosen, one by one. There's something beneath the church. It's not stone. It's not earth. It's not holy." The letter was turned over to authorities. No public statements were made. Many locals believe the church itself is cursed, a sacred space long since turned profane. They speak of cold spots inside the nave, of a strange smell that sometimes leaks from the floorboards, of candles that extinguish themselves when no wind is present. Some say they've heard crying in the walls. Others say they've heard laughter. And yet, no one leaves flowers. No one protests outside the gates. No documentaries are filmed on location. Because Delbrook learned long ago, attention invites consequence. Still, small gestures remain. Every year on the Sunday closest to October 12th, the anniversary of the second disappearance, a group of parents gathers at the edge of the woods near the church. No signs, no speeches, just silence. They light 14 lanterns and send them drifting into the sky. Some watch until the lights fade. Others close their eyes and pray, not for answers anymore, but for peace. There's a story often told in hushed tones around town, about a boy who survived, not an altar boy, just a visitor, a cousin from out of state, brought to Mass one summer. He never spoke publicly, but he told his sister something that she later told a friend, who told someone else, until the story leaked. He said he got lost in the church that day, wandered into a hallway he didn't recognize. The light bulbs were dim, the air thick. He found a door, old wooden. It was unlocked. He stepped inside. He says he doesn't remember what he saw, only that he woke up in his uncle's car, hours later, vomiting uncontrollably. When his family asked what happened, he cried and said only, "It smells like wet books," and screaming. No one talks about that hallway anymore, of course. Skeptics still exist. Some say the story is mass hysteria, a town myth born of grief and media attention. That the boys ran away. That the church was just a backdrop to unrelated tragedies. But those skeptics never lived in Delbrook. They never heard the silence. They never stood inside St. Joseph's alone after sundown. And the truth is that something happened, something terrible, something systematic, and whether it was orchestrated by human hands or something far older, far darker, no one is willing to say. Because the deeper you dig into Delbrook, the more you start to feel like you're being watched. There are too many gaps in the timeline. Too many people who moved away. Too many files missing from archives. It's as if the case itself doesn't want to be solved. And maybe that's by design. Some theories suggest the number 14 isn't arbitrary. In certain esoteric texts, 14 is a number linked to sacrifice, transition, and gates. In ancient Egyptian mythology, Osiris was cut into 14 pieces. In numerology, 1 and 4 add to 5, the number of mankind, change, and instability. Was there symbolism in the number of boys? Were they selected based on criteria we still don't understand? Birth order, bloodline, virtue, or were they simply unlucky? There are so many unanswered questions. Why did the church refuse external inspections? Why were priests quietly transferred or retired after each incident? Why did one of the clergy involved reportedly lose his voice and never speak again until his death? What happened in the crypt that no one was allowed to enter since 1987? And most disturbing of all, why did it all stop after the 14th? Was the quota fulfilled? Was the ritual complete? Or is it simply waiting to begin again? In the end, Delbrook remains quiet, too quiet. The church still holds mass, barely attended. The bell tower still rings 14 times. And though the pews are empty, some say if you walk into St. Joseph's late enough at night, you'll hear whispers, small, soft voices, like children trying to remember prayers they were once forced to forget. Maybe they're echoes, maybe they're memories, or maybe they're still there, waiting, watching.